President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his top diplomat, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, are in Paris, where they're meeting EU and Ukrainian counterparts to discuss the war in the country. It's the highest level of transatlantic engagement since February about ending the war. But will it lead to any progress? Mr. Witkoff said he could see a peace deal emerging after meeting the Russian president last week. But European allies of Ukraine want the US to put more pressure on Vladimir Putin. Those talks are happening as 3 people, including a young girl and an elderly woman, were killed in a Russian drone strike in the southeastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro. The regional governor says around 30 people were injured and 16 are being treated in hospital after the strikes hit homes as well as student accommodation. Meanwhile, Russia is accusing Ukraine of using civilians as human shields following its strike on the northeastern city of Sumy on Sunday, which killed at least 35 people and injured more than 100 others. The BBC has spoken to numerous local civilians who say the missile struck in a busy central area and that many of those killed were returning home from Easter church services. Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson went on to accuse Kyiv of staging the attack.
Over the last days, the so-called collective West raised the public outrage on the 13th of April by the Russian army, a high-precision strike with demolition rockets at a restaurant Magellan, where a meeting of Ukrainian command with participation of the Western instructors took place in Sumy city. All these Western media hyped on this poorly staged propagandistic fake, on the alleged rocket attack who killed women and children. We've made several comments on this topic, but I think that this day and these things must be talked a lot about so that everyone knew about the crimes of the Kyiv regime.
Well, we are going to be live in Paris during the programme to bring you the very latest on those discussions that are happening about the war in Ukraine. But first, the BBC Verify team has published an investigation of what's happening to the homes of Ukrainian residents who have fled the city of Mariupol. They have found how Russian authorities are systematically seizing thousands of homes from those residents who have gone. Their special report, as the city marks 3 years of occupation, is available now online. If you want to find out more details, head to the BBC News website or check out the BBC News app. Well, it's a complicated process to verify the information coming out of Ukraine. To explain more about what's involved in compiling this new online report, let's hear from the BBC Verify team.
I'm Olga Robinson and I'm an assistant editor at BBC Verify, and I have been one of the leading investigators on this story. For this investigation, we wanted to have a deeper look at how Russia-installed authorities in the city of Mariupol have been seizing homes of Ukrainian residents. Well, it all started with these documents that I have found on the official website of the city authorities. There was one document in particular that sparked my interest because it contained hundreds of addresses in Mariupol and I couldn't quite get my head around what it all meant. So the document was talking about properties that have signs of being ownerless, and ownerless is a legal term that the Russian installed authorities use to describe property that in their opinion is not used or has not been properly registered with the Russian authorities. I wanted to understand the scale of what was happening. Altogether, there were thousands of addresses on the list, and just to go through them manually just didn't feel feasible. So I decided to go to one of our colleagues and seek advice on how to make it more manageable.
I'm Christine Jevons. I'm a senior data journalist at BBC Verify, and I did the data analysis for the story about the homes of Mariupol. When Olga showed me the data, I could see that it was a really good candidate for doing geocoding. Geocoding is when you take something that is a written address and turn it into a latitude and longitude coordinates, which is what you need to plot it on a map. So the first step was to standardise the data and change that into Excel spreadsheets so that I could run a data analysis on it. After converting all the data to spreadsheet format, the next stage was to clean the data, and what that means is to make sure that everything is standardised. I could then plot them on a map, and that was the goal. Once all the data was all in one place, you could trace how some of these properties were flowing through the systems. I could see one flat in a block in the city centre that first appeared in a list on the 20th of September, but then it appeared in a second list in November, but by December it was on the final list of the final stage before it would be taken into city control.
I think the data analysis really helped us visualise and get a proper understanding of the sheer extent of this scheme and how many people have been affected by these housing plans.
It was really interesting to work on this project because it's one that requires so many different skill sets and so many different people on the team who are Russian speakers, Ukrainian speakers, able to follow the intricate process, and then to bring data into that as well made it a fascinating project.
Okay, well, let's return to those talks in Paris and what can we expect from them. We can talk now to Sir Kim Darroch, the former UK ambassador to the United States and former national security advisor. Thank you very much for joining us. So your thoughts on what's happening in Paris today, the US, the UK, France, obviously, Germany, Ukraine, all involved. What might we expect from that?
First of all, it's a good thing, Anita, that this meeting is happening. It's an opportunity for information to be exchanged, for discussions to happen, and for coordination to be delivered. In terms of how the meeting will run, I think it's likely to be two parts. First of all, the Europeans and Ukraine will want to know about what has been happening in these exchanges between Washington and Moscow. Witkoff, the lead US envoy, has had a meeting with Putin recently. What happened there? What other exchanges and contacts are going on? Where exactly are the Russians now? And then the second big issue is we've had some threats from President Trump to Moscow about further sanctions if they don't support an unconditional ceasefire, which the Ukrainians are supporting. Russians still haven't got there. That attack on Sumy, which you've just reported on, terrible attack, lots of Ukrainian deaths, and yet President Trump used it to say the Ukrainians should never have started the war, which is a strange thing to say. So I think the Europeans and Ukrainians will want to know, what is the American game plan if Russia continues to refuse to agree to a ceasefire, which is in a way the easiest and most limited step that you can ask of them before you get into serious negotiations on the substance of this conflict. So if they won't even do that, that's a pretty bad start.
And as we talk to you, we're just also showing our viewers images of the King, who is in Durham for the Monday service, Thursday service there. But let's continue our discussion on those talks in Paris on Ukraine. And presumably, Ukraine, its European allies will be saying to Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Rubio, well, look at this latest Russian attack in Dnipro. Is that the action of a country which is serious about peace and getting into ceasefire talks?
Exactly. I mean, they'll want to be constructive. They won't want a row about where we are now. But I hope that they will put some ideas on the table about ways of putting more pressure on Russia. And there are several options here. I mean, the obvious one, which Trump has already talked about, is more sanctions on Russia, though I think there is a limit to how effective sanctions are, and Russia's had sanctions on them for a long time. It's not stopped the war effort. But there are other things. You could supply more weapons, you could supply better weapons, you could do both. You could have fewer restrictions on how the weapons are used, so there could be more Ukrainian strikes into Russian territory. But more interestingly for me, there are $350 billion worth of Russian assets scattered around European banks. We've already decided to use the interest on those assets, that money, to fund Ukraine. But you could go further. You could think about using the capital to help Ukraine as well.
But if I could just come in there, you're talking about pressure on Russia, but how, during these talks today, do the other parties gathered there put more pressure on the US to do that, to take a different approach to Russia, and for the US to add to that pressure more than, as you mentioned, Donald Trump sort of suggesting that Ukraine had started the war? So how can they persuade the US to take a tougher stance with Russia?
Well, they should be saying to the Americans, I'm sure, look, we've all supported you on this peace effort. We have offered resources for a reassurance force, if that's part of the deal. You have talked about bringing both sides to the table, putting pressure on them. The president has said, there may be some action against Russia if they refuse to do it. So let's see that. We're all back behind you. We will support you in efforts to put more pressure on Russia through some of the options that I've mentioned. But we need to know from you, take a lead here, what are you going to do? Because this peace effort will not go anywhere unless you can actually get Russia to agree to the very basic requirement of a ceasefire.
OK, Sir Kim Darroch, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks.